Hello, welcome to my new video. In this video I'm going to cover the Lisicin Gambit for white. I think it's a good weapon against the Dutch, but only if white plays knight f3 first move, and after black's f5 to gambit this pawn with e4. And now black has two options, to capture or not to capture. Let's first cover the options when black doesn't capture this pawn. Just to mention that these options are not so good. The best option is to capture, but first let's cover this. What can black do here? The f5 pawn is under attack, so the most logical move here, if you don't want to give up the pawn, is to go for something like d6. It's not that good because after capturing, let's say bishop captures, you can go d4, and if black tries something to develop his pieces, let's say after this, white can trade bishops. Now it's good for white if black captures on d3 immediately because queen gets into the play as well. So maybe the most logical here is to go queen d7, but after castling, knight c6, knight c3, black is still very passive and white has a pretty good game here because the bishop on f8 is still out of play and it's not so easy to push e5 without weakening the pawn structure. White might even go with d5 next to gain some space in the center, so I feel like potentially there is a weak e6 square. Imagine that black exchanges bishops, and after d5, knight d4 and knight e6, black is getting completely cramped, and I think it's a really good position for white in that case. The second option, besides d6, if you don't want to capture the pawn on e4, is to go for knight c6, but then white captures on f5, you can transpose after d6 into some similar variation as previously, as after d6 immediately, and after d4 you can even push d5 next. And already black faces some serious issues because after knight b4, let's say to just do some threats on white's queen side, knight d4, attacking and defending c2 at the same time, queen d7, and now after knight c3 white develops pretty normally, pretty easily. After knight f6 there's bishop b5, and now black has to play c6, but after this, what does black do? If he takes with a b pawn, there's bishop a4, and the next is going to be a3, using this weak pawn on c6. The bishop on f8 is a very, very bad piece. Maybe this recapture is better, but again, after capturing, castling, white is better, and he might even do some blockade on these central pawns of black. And also they might be a potential target once they move to e6 or d5. Also, I forgot to mention that after knight c6 and capturing on f5, there's d5. To somehow try to get bishop f5, e5 on time to get some central control, but now we use this d5 move to get bishop b5, because now the e5 square is the key. We want to use this square as an outpost for our pieces. Once black takes, knight e5 comes, and after queen d6, then just d4, and after knight f6, just castle, go bishop f4, and white has a very, very pleasant position because of this nice outpost on e5, and it's much easier to play as white here. Bishop f4 comes next, knight d2, knight f3 as well, maybe just go here, knight d2, knight f3, control e5 as much as possible, go rook e1 if you need, take the control over the position. More or less that's it about non-gambit on the move 2. Most usually black takes on e4, and now white goes knight g5, tries to recapture this pawn on e4, but also it hints that it might do some damage on the king side. Now black has several options. The best option, I believe, is knight f6. But let's first check the other options. One of the options is to play d5, to save this pawn and to be ready to kick this knight at some point. Not immediately, because there is a check on h5 in case of h6 immediately, so that's not gonna happen. Also, let's mention that h6 leads to a checkmate. Just in case, don't recapture on e4. And after d5 you don't give a check because it's pretty useless. g6 just keeps everything under control. Now we go d3. Now we're hoping that black is capturing on d3, but we'll see the transposition into this line. And this line in particular is very dangerous, and it's one of the target variations of this gambit. If black doesn't return the pawn back, he's in big trouble. He always has to give this pawn back if he wants to survive. There is also one more anti-gambit line, and that's e3. But I think here that after bishop e3, white is doing better because now he's going to play d4 no matter what, unless black plays h6. I think the most principled here is to go for e5 to somehow try to gain control over the center, but after d4, now if black captures, you can take with the queen, and then white has a very nice plan. Knight c3, castling long and launching some attack on the king, because the black's king is gonna just castle short side, because there's no way that he can castle queen side because of the a7 weakness and also of this battery of queen and bishop on d4 and d3. Here, if black tries to kick this queen away, but by playing this, you can go bishop b5, and especially now, black has no option of going for a queenside castle because there's always some bishop c6 and doubling the pawns. So in case of this, knight c3, in my opinion, black is slightly worse here. I feel like it's a much easier position to play. Knight on g5 can be quite annoying, since h6 would just weaken the kingside squares. And in this position, after d4, in this position, if black tries to block with e4, white can undermine these pawns by c4, trying to make this e4 pawn a target. Or d5, depends on how black reacts. And if he reacts like this to not break the pawn chain, now white can just continue putting pressure by knight c3, and if knight f6, queen b3. Now white is adding some pressure on d5 pawn, and in case of h6, even without it, white can go knight h3 back, knight f4, and put additional pressure to d5. And also, it's very useful that b7 is held by the bishop. So the bishop on c8 cannot be included so easily into defending this d5 pawn. So I think even here, white is the one who puts slight pressure. That was it from move 3, from the sidelines. There are a couple of transpositions, and I'm going to cover these variations which might appear on the board, like in this case after d5, d3 takes. This is a very important position in this gambit. If you achieve this position, you are almost winning. There's also one more, and that's knight f6. And after d h6, knight goes back, and we will see what happens afterwards. Let's go back to this move order. So we had knight f3, f5, e4 takes, knight g5, knight f6, and now white again plays d3. And let's see what happens if black tries to hold on to this pawn by d5. And now we take on e4, and we hope that black takes with the pawn, of course, because this is just game over, losing the rook and bye-bye. Black can play knight e4 as well, but it doesn't promise too much, because after this endgame, black is a pawn up, that's for sure, but the quality of this pawn, of this extra pawn, is really suspect. You can just develop by knight c3 and bishop f4 castling, and you can gang up on this pawn on e4. You have also the other option, after knight e4 to capture and go give a check. And the point is, after g6 you have queen e5. Attacking the rook, and after this, queen e4, white gained the pawn back, and also the king side is a bit disturbed. White is obviously better because of that, so let's go back. After d5 and you capturing, the most logical here is to play h6 to kick this knight away, and now we go back. And now we are not afraid of knight e4, because after this, there are a couple of threats. This one, queen h5 check with the potential checkmate, knight g6 as well, but mostly queen h5. What can black do here to stop this? He can go to f6, but after bishop d3, now we have bishop g6 combined with knight f7 threats. And black has too many holes in the position to survive this. There is simply no way for black to stop white capturing his rook, at least. So the best way to deal with this, after knight f3, is not to recapture with the knight. Black can do this, but after exchanging queens and going knight e5, now this threat appears, and black has two ways of dealing with this. The first one is king e8, after which you can just continue developing by knight c3, and you want to go even knight b5, and if let's say black plays a6 to stop this, now you can play knight g6, rook g8, and now bishop f4, completely dominating the position. If bishop f5, you can take on f8, rook f8, and bishop c7, and you got the pawn back, and also you get the bishop pair. So obviously white is the one who is better. Black also has a damaged pawn structure, and I feel like the only variation here that is worth mentioning is semi-forced one with e3, because that way at least you want to somehow fix your structure to force somehow this line, to claim that you kinda make the structure symmetrical, but the issue with this move is that after castling, now white wants to capture on e3, and if ef2, then there is this check, bishop c4, everything is forced in this line, so after this, rook f1, now you're going to recapture the pawn. Again, white is slightly better because of the bishop pair. So after knight e5, threatening this, king e8 seemed like one of the logical options. The second one is bishop e6, but bishop e6 stops the development of the bishop from f8, and now white just has a simple development as usually. Knight bd7, you can go bishop f4, and black can exchange, but does it really solve his problems? Not so much. After castling, king e8, h3, now you're slowly going to capture this pawn back on e4. You might go even with g4, bishop g2, but you don't have to be so drastic. You can play bishop e2, you can play slowly. Rook e1 and slowly build some pressure on this pawn, eventually capture it. Okay, let's go back. So we covered this endgame variation with d5, which leads to a slightly better endgame to white. What else can we do? He can do h6. It leads to a very interesting variation. Now we capture on e4 with the knight, and we hope that black is going to capture back, which leads to this unfortunate checkmate. 7 moves to win, not too bad, right? But of course, black doesn't have to capture like this. He can go with e6. And now we go bishop e2. We go for this very unpleasant check. He might go for g6, but I really don't like this move for black, because it just compromises the whole position. White can go for a castle and eventually capture on f6, go d4 and put some pressure on this g6 pawn. After this, let's say castle, you can go with d4, f4 and eventually put pressure on g6. If you need, you can go c3 and d4 to just support this pawn. So after this e6, bishop e2, and now it's best for black to go for d5 and to face that he's going to lose castling rights. White has to be principled and play for this. After capturing, now black gets the advantage of the bishop pair, but it's not so simple. Basically, the plan is the same, to somehow try to open up the center by c4 at some point. Let's just mention first king e7. If king e7, then knight g3. Let's say if you want to exchange queens, which is the best defensive move here, you can go back, and the king on e7 is blocking the center. Black wants to push e5, but he will need some time to do so. White is going to castle, play c4, and try to open up the position as much as possible. Also, if he needs, he can go for f4 and try to break these pawns in the center to make the king more vulnerable. If he goes to d7, which makes the space for the bishop but blocks the bishop on c8, now you can go back again, knight c6, castle, and again you have the similar idea to go c4 and to open up the position. Let's say if black plays bishop d6, then there's c4, very strong move. The position gets opened up. If you push d4, then you get outpost for the knight on e4, and that's also not what you want as black. So I think after castling, the position becomes really rich, really sharp. Also, after the fourth move, d3, let's go back a bit. So we had this, e4 takes knight g5, knight f6, d3, and now we have h6. But what happens if black goes with e3, again with some anti-gambit line? Well, we can do this. And after e5, which seems the most principled, since you want to capture some space in the center, then white answers with d4, and after this bishop d4, now we have something similar to what we saw before. Here the idea is somewhat different because the queen is not on d4. White can go with knight c3, bishop d3, and be flexible in terms of castling. White might even castle queenside to launch some attack on the kingside, or if black tries to castle queenside, then to castle kingside and also launch some minority attack. But even if it's a same side castle, I think white has pretty good chances because of this slightly weakened kingside with only 2 pawns. And now let's see the key position which we hope to get as white. I just want to mention this: if black somehow gives the pawn back, then he's not in so much danger. But let's see first what happens if he takes on d3 here. Now we have some pressure on the h7 pawn, but you might think, okay, but currently it's nothing. He defends twice, we attack twice, so it's nothing. But let's put some random move on the board. Let's put a6. What does white do here? Well, he might capture with the knight on h7, and now, however you capture, bishop g6 comes next with checkmate. So that's something, because now black cannot avoid bishop g6 and losing the castling rights, at least. When you go with bishop g6, you will go also with knight g5 next. Have some potential fork on f7, so that's already a big trouble for black. How does black stop this? He might go with g6, after which also knight h7 deserves some attention. It's not so clear to me what happens after this. Rook f7, black gets 2 pieces for a rook. I'm not sure about this. After g6, the best way to deal with this is to go h4, to try to break this small pawn chain on the king side. Now you want to go h5 and even to sacrifice the exchange. For example, if you go with d5, to somehow meet h5 with bishop g4 and capturing the pawn. Now there is h5, and what are you gonna do? If knight captures, then you take, king d7, and now knight f7 comes, and the queen is lost because if queen moves to e8, there is a checkmate on d5. If black tries to be principled by playing bishop g4, now he's losing the bishop after f3, bishop h5 and g4. White wins a piece. There's no enough compensation for the piece. Even though black is going to get 3 pawns for it, the light squares are going to be criminally weak. What actually happens after h4? If you go knight c6, just ignore this, then just h5. And how do you hold this? If gh, rook h, and then just on the next move you can even take on h7. It's a very dangerous position. So capturing like this, bishop d3, what else is possible? If e5, you take like this, and now the king side of black just falls apart. Bishop g6 comes next, followed by knight f7. If knight captures, then just give a check, and now we have somewhat forced line. Now we chase the king all the way here. You can go for this. Going for knight d5. Now black has to do something, and that something is not so promising. Let's say a5, you can give a check, and after this, take with the knight. That is game over because black cannot avoid some discovered check. Let's say if bishop c5, there's queen c5, and after this, checkmate. Around here, if you go c6, now there's bishop e3, and if they go to c7, then knight d5, checkmate. If they go here, there is queen a4, checkmate. So it's really bad. Yeah, after d3, the best option, the one that worries me the most about white's position here, is to just give the pawn back and just play e5. It leads to somewhat dry position. And now you don't capture with the knight because after d5, black gets the central control, and after this, queen f6, black gets too much control after bishop c5, castling and putting some pressure on white. So the best option here is to go for d4. Black can kick the knight away by h6, and after this, to just develop normally. After knight c6, not capturing the pawn on e4 because now you capture back on e5, and now you have queen h5 threats, and if the knight goes back to f6, there is bishop d3, and bishop g6 threats are quite annoying. The best way for black is just to be calm and play knight c6, bishop c4, bishop c5, and here there is a potentially interesting line. If black tries to be adventurous, plays knight e4. Now white can play queen d3. If the knight moves, then queen g6, with some potential trouble for black. But I think this is the only move that holds the balance, and after c3, now black goes back to d6. And now the point is, after this, there is e4, and if you want to keep This knight you want to go queen e2, but I think after knight c4 there is nothing to play for really. Queen c4 you take on f3 and black should be doing fine, I guess. But here after knight e6, now you have the option of queen g6, and after this bishop b3, the position becomes a bit shaky for black, because now white wants to go bishop e3, knight d2, just castle and launch some attack on the king. If bishop c5, bishop e3, even better now if he takes on e3. Now the f file is opened and I feel like this is very dangerous for black. But if black wants to kill the game completely, then he doesn't capture on e4, he just plays bishop c5. And when you castle d6, here knight e4 loses the piece immediately by queen d5. Because now the knight on e4 is under attack, you want to go for checkmate. If you want to save from checkmate by knight d6, then the bishop drops. And again, black can just play calmly by d6. You go a3, queen e7, and unfortunately for white here, he has to play something like knight c3, which is pretty dull. It looks like some kind of Italian, some kind of Spanish Schliemann. Unfortunately, if you want to gamble, you can go for knight h4, trying to get knight g6. If you want to play safely, I don't recommend this move, because black might know this and he might find over the board knight g4. If black plays any other move, you go knight g6 and you claim advantage. But this move, knight g4, just refutes the whole variation. And now actually white has to go back to f3 if he doesn't want to lose. Let me show you what happens if white just goes with it and plays knight g6. Well, we have queen f6. Now black hits the f2 pawn, and if this happens, bishop f2, king h1, and now queen h4. Now you attack h2, and the only move is either to capture on g4, which loses the queen immediately, or to play h3. But after h3 there is queen g3, again targeting h2. White has to give up the queen, because if hg, then there is checkmate. And that's why this whole line doesn't work. Knight h4 is very risky because of that, because it just loses the tempo after knight g4. And white has to go back to f3. Variation I'm gonna finish this video with is after queen e7 not to go with knight h4. Knight h4 has a very nice idea, but it's a very risky move, so I don't recommend it if you want to play safely. If you want to play safely, you play knight c3. After bishop g4, the position becomes really double-edged. As white, you can just step away from the pin by queen d3, or first play h3 and play queen d3. And in case of castling on the queen side, both sides have some chances for attack. That's it. If you have any questions about the variation, some particular line, let me know in the comment section. Just to conclude this opening is a very nice surprise weapon, but if black knows what he's doing, if he's familiar with the opening, he will steer the game into this line, into this final line. And I feel like the main focus of this opening is what happens if black is greedy and captures the pawn, doesn't give the pawn back. In that case, black is in so much trouble. That's what's most important. In case he anti-gambits, usually things are not so simple, and it's not so easy for white to claim some advantage. Thank you so much for watching, and see you very soon. Bye.